So I already did this presentation at some other meetings, including Hand and Drive, so I'm trying to adapt it for each subsequent version, but it still has some parts which I'm not going to go over because you can see, for example, a recent one during my Berlin presentation at recent Drive meeting, and it was more detailed with regards to, let's say, technical infrastructure. Now I'm mostly going to focus on people. So just as a backstory, we had been running Ukrainian TLD for many years. I can't say for how many, at least 25. The company existed for about 20 years. It was formed originally by people who were running Ukrainian domain as a non-profit, and then we created a for-profit company to continue operating it as a basically self-sustained operation without help of, I don't know, ISPs, government, funds, investors. And just to give you some background, it's a small team with about 20 people, including myself. I'm now the only person from the technical team located abroad, and we have several support staff located abroad, but most of our people are still in Ukraine, in various cities. Some of them have to evacuate, so it was actually very challenging, and now it's a new normal. I'm saying it's not easy, but you kind of get used to anything, you know. If you get 10-year sentence, you know, you say, okay, in 10 years I'll be a free man. Likewise with Ukraine, I think in 10 years you'll be maybe part of European Union, maybe something like that. But it's not about this. It's most about like when we had the first notice of that possible crisis, we had the denial of service attack a week before the war, and we learned some lessons. One of them was to fully separate the infrastructure into public and non-public parts, and let's say separate your core service from your customer-facing service. I mean, it's kind of obvious, right? You do this when you're a network engineer, your control plane, your data plane, your management plane. Well, not every operator works like that when it's application thing. And we did have some steps like creating a postmortem analysis and making some changes to our infra. And basically it was nothing significant, but it was a lesson. I would say it's better to have a small crisis before the big crisis, because the small crisis is going to teach you. But unfortunately, we didn't prepare for the crisis that came next, the war which happened, and I'm referring to World War II, which was the last time the war broke out in Ukraine. It was, well before my time. And most people, of course, including myself, didn't believe the news first. I was located abroad. I was actually in Cyprus on vacation, and I was just planning to, you know, have a nice week of remote work with little less snow and little more sun. And instead I started to, well, assessing the situation, making a list of people, list of systems, list of partners. And I would say without certain determination and certain luck and lots of copy and help of people, including my girlfriend, I would never sustain that. We had done several things, but I wanted to repeat my favorite 4-point list. Just like you have these 4 quadrants of important, urgent, etc., you have to say what are your priorities, and these were my priorities in the order. You have to prioritize your people, your staff, your systems are less important than the data on them, and likewise, the money is less important than the operation, hardware and software. It's kind of obvious, but if you think about it, many people, for example, try to be cost effective even during time of crisis, right? Or they try to, I don't know, load their people with a lot of system changes. In fact, it's better to do less work and always try to save the stress on your staff, make them to work shorter hours as necessary, and make them to move as few changes as possible. We didn't always do that, but now those are my lessons, so I can teach you how to do it right after you did something wrong. The typical TLD operator is basically a kind of application that it runs on its own software. In our case, it was dedicated servers. And there are some components which can make sense to you if you're doing the domain system. And here are a lot of people of CZ.NIC, so you know what you do. And that's why the whole story came to the fruition, because we have thought immediately how to partner with some company that can potentially be our new host if things are going really bad and we have to shut down entire operations in Ukraine. So what we had before, we had EPP service, which is basically a core of registry database. It was only in Ukraine. We had no mirrors of it outside of the country. And we have also had our DNSSEC signing and zone generation and other stuff. So part of that were ready to be replicated abroad. Part of that was already replicated abroad. Part of that was never been replicated abroad. So a lot of these things has to be done, like you put them in a matrix and you decide for each row which column of the matrix you're going to move this, right? So this is moving here, this is copied here, this is moved here and shut down there. So for example, we have to go down, we have to put down all of our systems in Kharkiv because Kharkiv was under occupation. Likewise, we have our system in another city, which I'm not going to name, which was also under, and it still is under occupation. So we have to shut down the system there and access to people who were located there. Some of those people managed to be evacuated, some of them did not. So right now it's a big problem, you know. You can manage your systems breach, you can manage your people leaving the company, but it's very hard to manage the situation when your people have been in the position where it can be potentially hijacked, killed, or forced to reveal the passwords to the system or likewise. I mean, it never happened in practice, but you cannot discount the threat. So this is not the usual IT security exercise where you think of external actors or maybe of a malicious people inside. No, your people aren't malicious. It's the army that is malicious, if you can say that. So we have built some kind of things already, and we were actually in the middle of migration to hosted GitLab instance. That was actually nice. We just have to put it somewhere else. And CZ.NIC was chosen as a company. I'm not going to put details where is which part located for security reasons, but let's say that we chose multiple locations already. It just became one of them, and we selected them based on our existing experience with other company which were used in Ukraine. So, for example, we did outsource some things, and we used Google Workspace to outsource our email because we decided to not move our legacy email system, and we have done some work, and those again are kind of good lessons that I can ask you to read and remember. And of course, this is not ultimate list, but it's good to build your network of people beforehand, right? So going to the conferences, right? You can meet those staff members of the companies you may be already working with, and it's very good to take their information down, because if something goes wrong, reaching out to the random staff member, let's say at Amazon or Google, yeah, okay, I know it's a big company, right? But they may be able to help you within the organization to escalate your issue or direct to the proper channel, or maybe you're just stressed out. You can ask them to be a proxy. As a manager, I was finding myself oftentimes just communication non-stop all day, managing multiple streams. We managed this by creating signal chats for each direction of our work. So for example, we had a chat dedicated to DevOps operation, a chat dedicated to pure operations or system administration, I used to call it, and the chat dedicated to the management, the chat dedicated to our external partners like NetNode and CZ.NIC and other companies. So in a way, it's better to be in this, let's say, modern mentality of the stream of talks versus an email mailbox that you have to organize by threads. Yes, chats have their downsides, but they have an upside because people usually react to them faster. And as long as you don't abuse it and send, for example, long information by email, but then ping people in the chat that I just send you an email. Or my favorite way now is to create a shared Google document or maybe a favorite cloud document solution and send a link to that so people can edit that and connect back. So try to not put information in the emails, because emails tend to be lost, misforwarded, getting too much quoting. Some people do down quoting, some people do top quoting. So try to save other people's time by keeping the state of, let's say, single source of truth in your own documents. Or in case of CZ.NIC, we had the shared documents. So for example, if they send us some information, we put that to the Google Doc that we use, but we also put some edits there, or put maybe some highlighted comments, so we can iterate on a shared document. It can be very simple, one-page text, but it's much better than email, trust me, because you can do this. And yes, Google isn't perfect, but it's a solution we chose. I guess you can use your hosted Nextcloud, for example, or you can use whatever vendor you choose, right? I don't want to recommend anything. So a few points that how we did cooperate with CZ.NIC. So there's way more to this than this slide. I just don't want to bore you with these details, but I contacted, actually, I think Andre reached to me himself. I should be not mistaken here, but I can explicitly ask him to allow us to be using CZ.NIC if it's possible, and I wasn't really sure what I want. So I said, we just need a few servers, and he said, do you need more? And I said, yeah, maybe. He said, okay, let us give you more, and maybe you need them later. So we started to deploy the thing, so they built us a small cluster of Proxmox machines, and we started to use that, and over time we migrated things there. So we were doing like multiply changes at the same time. One shared tool that we also used was again a Google document called changelog. We just put a simple plain text which we just tag with a date stamp, and each person says time, their username, what they have done. Usually it's just simple, but sometimes again, if you have to put a list of things you've done, if it's more than 2 lines, maybe you should put it in the Google document, not email. Why? Because static links tend to work better than email. I don't discount email, and for example, dealing with external people, you may have to use email. And I, for example, don't like, say, using, say, Zoom or something for decision making, only for discussion, because when it's written down in an object that persists and has universal address, it's much better, right? Chats don't persist, but at least they're visible and you can search them backwards in time. So if it's more than 24 hours old, it's too late. That's why it's important to keep a track. I would ideally wish for some kind of netbox-like system which would keep our audit trail. So for example, I can see which changes were done to this system. Maybe somebody made a plugin to Netbox. We don't use Netbox yet because we're not an ISP, but we probably should have used it for tracking our hardware virtual machines, and we are probably going to do this. We still use some Google spreadsheets. We don't have that many systems. Anyway, the stages were all discussed and usually planned. We had about a weekly loop, but the first few weeks, I think we had more like a daily loop. You know, what they call agile development, when you have the stand-up meetings and you say who is doing what. And I had maintained like 3 or 4 important projects at the same time. Again, it's very exhausting. I don't recommend it to you, but if you have to do it, maybe dedicate your time during the day, like before lunch things. So it's kind of easier to group things by schedule. Even if you don't feel like you want to do this now, it's better to force yourself. Otherwise, you tend to prioritize things that are nice feeling, easier to do, something you prefer. We used several tools that I want to mention. I already mentioned Signal and Google Docs. And Proxmox we used, well, actually, I don't think we used Bird, we used FRR, but anyway, we have used Unbound, and we used Bind. Yeah, so it looks like we don't use any of CZ.NIC developer software yet. Maybe we should. And I was thinking of adopting Fred or registry system, but that requires a lot of work on our end. Maybe we'll cooperate on that later. But anyway, using tools that you like and kind of growing up into them is usually better than changing things you do when the crisis hits. So again, kind of preparation is important, and it's better to have, yeah, I see you, your eggs laid down. We have learned interesting things, for example, how to run purely v6 operated DNS node, which we run now with CZ.NIC. That means that it has v4 connectivity within the DNS peering, but it has no publicly addressable v4. And that actually works wonderfully. We just use BGP and advertise using the private next hop addresses. We also partner with additional project called secondary.net.UA, which is also supporting certain domains in Ukrainian namespace apart from UA domains. We had been using many other companies, which I have tried to all list here. And specifically, I mentioned, well, IANA staff who helped us to update the root server records when we were adding one more name server. I did mention 6Connect here, which were spinning off another anycast instance for us, and it was done by partially same people who are working with Global NOC Alliance. Some people can do double job. I'm grateful to them, and other companies as well. I mentioned, of course, CS.NOC here and Center and NetNode, who invited me to give this talk earlier in a bit of different setting, but I found this to be a small, intimate group, and I enjoy your company here. And then I mentioned also, yeah, I do mention Global NOC Alliance, as you see, although they have not directly helped us much, but they did immeasurable help to any other companies in Ukraine who are providing citizens and residents with the necessary help. The Sweden Department of Internal Affairs helped to fund the anycast operation that NetNode is providing us. And there were also many other people that cooperated with me, and I can't fit them all into the slides, or I haven't asked their explicit permission to do so. Then I mentioned the Ukrainian army. The best story we had, again, I can talk about this forever, but I'm not going to. We have delegated domain to the military, and it was like down 0 to live in 48 hours, including setting up their primary and secondary DNS servers, because apparently people in the Ministry of Defense have never done this before, like teaching them how to take the firewall rules and stuff. That was fun. I did like it. I mean, it was sad and exhausting and dramatic, but when you kind of focus on work and you keep in the loop with other people's needs, it's very helpful. It takes your mind off the crisis and you stop feeling powerless and guilty of being alive and just not suffering. I know it's kind of perverse psychological situation. So I put my email address here on the top. Sorry for the kind of bad contrast of blue and orange. Yeah, and you can ask me questions in private also, or if you want to ask them now, you can go ahead and do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.